Namaste viewers. Dr. Joel Finkelstein is a Princeton neuroscientist. He got his PhD to look at by studying neurons and how learning happens, how we can reverse engineer, how we can use human learning right at the neuron level to train machines how to learn and also how to train human beings how to learn. So this is a very interesting cutting crossover between psychology, learning and neurology. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Good to meet you. Good to be here and good to see you guys.
We just met. He's in Princeton, I'm in Princeton, and we just met. And boy, what a meeting. We've been really excited about doing this together. So I will do a multi-part series of discussions with Joel because he's a fascinating person. He's a one-of-a-kind person. What he's doing, I don't think anybody else has done or is doing. He is involved in, he's one of the founders, or he'll tell us about it, Network Contagion Research Institute, yes. NCRI. So first of all, Joel, welcome to the show and tell us a little bit about NCRI.
Sure. So I am the director of research and the founder of the Network Contagion Research Institute. And this started, what the Institute does is that it uses scaled machine learning and quantitative analyses to identify and forecast threats that are coming from social media. So these could be threats to financial information on markets. We've published in Fortune on crypto schemes and manipulation of financial information from state actors. It could be conspiracy and it could be vaccine reluctance. We've worked with the likes of Walmart and Google to publish on the spread of vaccine reluctance and how online activity is interfering with vaccine uptake. It could be on how vulnerable communities are being threatened by violent actors and meme groups. And we've published on anti-Semitism, we've published on anti-Black hate, and lately quite a bit we published on Hinduphobia, which is a fairly new topic for our organization, but one that has been very engrossing to learn about.
So do you want, because among all your areas of work, I found your reports on Hinduphobia related things are very, very fascinating, and I think people have never seen these kind of reports done. It's not anecdotal. It's not like so-and-so said this and so-and-so said that. It's real scientific, analytical research, quantitative research. So tell us about Hinduphobia, what you feel about it, how did you discover it?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. So the Network Contagion Lab at Rutgers University, where we are training the next generation of analysts who come to work for the Central Intelligence Agency or the Federal Bureau of Investigation in the tradecraft of open source intelligence investigation and analysis. And so we often compete with these agencies to maintain and keep the best talent that we train, because these are very needed skills that aren't widely trained yet. And the methodology that we use mixes these quantitative measures with a way of thinking about the problems, a contagion map of how the problems spread, and an ability to perceive these things. So while we were studying and training students, I had a student bring to my attention a meme. And the meme was a familiar anti-Semitic depiction of a merchant figure who was, bent over greedily and rubbing their hands together, almost like a Shylock caricature. And we normally see these kinds of memes around anti-Semitic depictions, but this was a Hindu. And the distinction was that there were a few interesting distinctions, that the person was depicted as smelly, there were flies around them, but it was the exact same attributes. And as soon as I saw this, as soon as I saw that picture, I knew that this was there was something sophisticated about the hatred of Hindus that must be growing, because you don't see high quality, quote unquote funny, the articulate. They're an articulate subculture. So as soon as I saw that, I realized that there's something here that I never knew about.
Somebody knew what they were doing.
Someone knew what they were doing. And someone was appealing to other people who would know what that meant.
Right.
So as soon as we saw the meme, I said, okay, we need to study this. I don't know what this is. I've never seen this before. I didn't even know Hinduphobia was a word. Okay, so we began looking across different subcultural communities. And in these subcultural communities, there's a lot of extremist elements and they're very influential, these meme communities like 4chan and 8chan. And as we began looking there, we saw the development of code words. Now that's always a bad sign. When you see hatreds that are encoded, And people use code words to avoid
the dog whistle for somebody else who understands.
Exactly. And not just that, you think about it. You have a coded language with somebody about a shared enemy, that's romantic.
Right.
You now have an inside kind of like feel about who they really are.
There's a mystique, a kind of a cult.
Absolutely. And the cartoonish images, I mean, it's like right from hieroglyphs. People really get captivated by this kind of
So you saw a lot of Hinduphobia encoded in memes.
Absolutely. And so when we began to analyze the spread, first of all, we used natural language processing and machine learning to take those code words and break down what they really meant. We could do that with graph analysis, and we could see the depictions and the clusters of meaning that were associated with these terms. So what we saw in terms like a Pajeet, I didn't even know what a Pajeet is. It's a made-up name, actually.
Right.
It's what an Indian person would sound like.
Right.
So they take this name Pajeet, and we look up what is a Pajeet, and so we see these clusters. A Pajeet is someone who's insidious and deceptive and a scam artist who's going to scam your money away, just like the Jew, right?
Right.
And is also trying, to take over, and they're smelly and foul. So we could see these kinds of depictions coming out of a mythology that appeared rich, but that was just the surface. Beneath that, we began seeing memes that were completely genocidal in their depictions.
This whole network you have
Absolutely, yep.
of the Pajeet.
Yeah, and you saw a bunch of other code words there, like
so you said it's a word that they want to associate with the Hindu when they want to caricaturize Hindu, and it means dehumanization, dirtiness, immorality, these sort of things.
Scam, exactly.
A scam artist.
Yep.
An idiot, this kind of a thing.
Exactly, and what was worse than that was that there were two things that we detected that were of great concern. The first was that the memes, the cartoons that were associated with this, some of them were sort of poking fun and saying these are smelly, etc. Some of them were genocidal. And they were
call to violence. Very explicitly call to violence.
Extraordinarily explicit. I mean, these were depictions of Nazis. Again, much of this inspired by anti-Semitism. Nazis gassing Hindus to death, and calls of white supremacists and Islamists that were celebrating the mass murder.
So there is one picture here of this Nazi flag, and it says "fuck Hindutva."
Yeah.
And then there is this Nazi symbol and Trishul, which is a Shiva Hindu symbol, being merged together.
Absolutely. So the association of Hindus with Nazis, and even there were even more specific ones where you saw these Pepe the Frog caricatures just literally murdering Hindus and celebrating the attacks of Mumbai and calling for genocide. And that isn't xenophobia. That's not what xenophobia looks like.
Right.
That's a genocidal ideology. So we saw, and then the other thing that was troubling was that we saw a confluence between Islamist communities on Telegram and other places and white supremacist communities that were sharing these memes with one another.
This is very interesting. You would expect that white supremacists would be totally opposed to Islamists.
Yeah.
You would expect that. Being sort of different wings in the right wing, left wing dichotomy. But facing a common enemy or common threat or a common target, they seem to be sharing.
That's exactly right. And you see that sometimes with, anti-Semitism as well, right? That sometimes hatred loves company.
Right.
So I think that we saw those trends were worrisome, but when we looked at the graphs, we saw an exponential growth in the use of the coded language across the subcultural communities. Now, I will tell you, we work with people who are very senior in law enforcement. One of the people we work with who's on this paper was Chief Jack Donahue. He was chief of our nation's capital of intelligence during the January 6th events. Denver Riggleman, who was an author on this paper, was the chief technical officer for that investigation. I believe John Farmer was on the paper.
Yeah.
He was the former chief attorney general from New Jersey, who then became a chief investigator for the 9/11 Commission. These are very serious senior folks in critical intelligence. And we've seen this signal enough to know that when you see these surges of code words, real-world violence will follow inevitably.
So what you are doing is not just wagging the finger at bad behavior in the past, but a model to forecast future. And
we've seen this, and we saw it enough to know.
This is very serious because, I don't know anyone else who's got a predictive model,
Yeah.
which says when you see this behavior on the internet and social media, etc., you will see following soon thereafter attacks, violence, etc. So that is your predictive. That is
a predictive framework, and I think we said in the report, if I'm not mistaken, I think what we said in the report was that we warned specifically that when we see this kind of signal, we know enough to know that the real world violence is imminent. We assessed that was true. Okay, we assessed that was true from the signal. Now, very few people picked this up. We got this at an NPR station in California. We got the story out in NPR, and it was quiet for a while. 3 weeks later, the attacks against Hindus began.
Right.
Across North America, in England, in various places, we began seeing the desecration of statues, the desecration of Hindu temples and planned houses of worship. We saw Hindus being attacked here in the United States and elsewhere. Rashes of attacks across Canada.
I mean, there was against the Baptist temple. There was against ISKCON.
Absolutely.
There was against various Hindu mandirs, Sri Ram mandirs. And you have examples in the United States, in Canada, in Britain, in Australia, various places.
The week after our report came out, there was an assault, an attack against a sitting U.S. lawmaker for being Hindu. Okay, so so after that happened, the press was like, "Hey, didn't these guys mention something about this?" And suddenly we were in the Washington Post with the word Hinduphobia. Suddenly we were in Newsweek with the word Hinduphobia. Suddenly the BBC was talking about Hinduphobia and not using that word to make fun of Hinduphobia.
Yeah.
So
just for those few people who keep giving me their advice that I should retire the word Hinduphobia because I started popularizing it 30 years ago.
Yeah,
because
well done.
because Akbar Ahmed from Pakistan was a visiting professor at Princeton, and he started Islamophobia, and we were friends. And so he told me about Islamophobia and how he's having conferences and giving awards for those who fight Islamophobia and all. So then I looked up Hinduphobia. There was no mention in the internet at that time. Islamophobia, there were hundreds of thousands of hits. So I figured, we ought to start talking about Hinduphobia. So it was very difficult to convince our community to talk about it because they didn't want to believe it. They said, we are doing well, we got nice houses, we got nice cars, and our kids are doing well, we're making money. They didn't realize that the Jews were also very wealthy at one point in time in Europe.
Yeah.
So all that does not protect you.
No, it doesn't.
If there is hate speech, if there's bias which turns into hate speech, it might turn into violence.
Okay, this is a very important point, so I want to make sure that we dwell on it for a second. What we're seeing in the data, and by the way, before this report came out, to your credit, when we looked at the word Hinduphobia on Google, all we saw was Indian news.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
After this report came out, we began seeing mentions of the Washington Post, and so now Google is showing different results.
Right.
Okay, so that is the importance of data.
So you're training Google also.
We're training Google also. We're training we're trying to make it clear that what we're seeing has a name. We need a name for it.
Right.
Okay. So now to your point about the comfort that the Hindu community here in America as an upper class community experiences, this is not when you have this kind of symbolism, when you have this kind of organization on dark regions of the internet, when you see the hardening of these positions and the organization of violence that spreads from this is not the kind of thing that stops. It's the kind of thing that is stopped. Okay, there's a difference between those two things, right? And
it's not self-correcting.
It will not be self-correcting.
You have to intervene and take a hard stand.
That's exactly right. And the thing is, many diasporic communities have grown to really try to avoid the publicity of standing up in the face of the things that are haunting them.
So there are a couple of things I face, and I want your reaction from our people.
Yeah.
One of them they say is, this is the result of ignorance, and we'll just educate these people and they'll become friends. As if it's sort of benign, as if they don't know what they're doing.
Yep.
Whereas I think it's sinister, they know what they're doing.
Yep.
And the second is that this is not a phobia because, actually they don't understand polytheism, or they don't understand our deities. It's again a matter of ignorance, and they are sort of they want to enlighten us in terms of our faith being incorrect, and they want to give us the paths to heaven and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
What you're pointing out is this is phobia because they're saying these Hindus are this way, Hindus are that way, go after them. Hindus are dangerous people, Hindus are evil people. All of that is, so therefore, It is not just a bias. It is not just
It's
ignorance.
unreasoned. It's unreasoned.
It is beyond all that.
Yeah, and that's why you see these images, these impossible to believe images. They're so shocking that are conveying an ideology. It's ideological. It's unreasoned, and therefore it won't respond to reason. So listen, that isn't true for everybody. I mean, I think there's some people who, I think you can probably reach most people, but if you don't believe that there's such a thing as a monster, right? So there's a couple ways to get this wrong. You can think that everyone's a monster. There's a huge cost to that. Because if you assume everyone's a monster, there's no one you can talk to.
Right.
Right? It's such a costly thing to do.
Right.
But just because it's costly doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. We need to figure out what those edge cases are. We need to figure out where there are people are that we really can't reach. And we need to know that those people actually do exist. We shouldn't kid ourselves because it's too costly to pretend that's true.
Right.
Okay, so that's the problem that I think many diasporic communities face, is they don't understand how to get the balance right, and they don't understand what their role is in managing the problems that are coming for them.
So one thing we've talked about is these memes that appear. You've analyzed them. You figured out that there's a network behind it.
Yep.
And so there's a cause. There's this network behind it.
Yes.
And there's an effect that it turns into violence.
Yes.
So there's a network of influencers.
Yes.
That are producing all this stuff on the internet, and then it's producing violence.
Now, Rajiv, I think that is a great abstract structure diagram. In fact, what we should do is we should create that structure diagram.
Yes.
And throughout this conversation, what we should do is we should narrow in on the components of the structure diagram, because now we're going to get into the subcomponents of that structure.
Yes. So tell me, are there actors specifically, whether it's a foreign government, whether it's a religious organization, that you can name and identify and say, there are such people we can identify that have a very high correlation, their involvement with all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think now we need to talk about not just the relationality between the threats that are emerging from the social cyber domain and the impacts or feedback from the real world. We should drill down into the mechanisms.
Before we close this, I just want to show some pictures of the Mumbai attacks.
Yep.
And how they've been characterized.
I think those are really important for viewers to see.
And so you looked at, people have seen Mumbai attacks, but how they've shown the Indian cops as sort of bad guy, dark, sinister characters, muzzling the Muslims, and they've shown it as Islamophobia. They've tried to show it as that this rather than showing the Muslim attackers as the culprits.
And I'd go a step further. I mean, we have memes that show Pepe the Frog, and this shows you the hybridization between the Islamist ideologies and the white supremacists, celebrating the beheading of Hindus.
Whoa.
Those memes that we saw, and that's right here. So the memes that we saw, when we saw that, within months, within weeks, we saw beheadings occurring in India. So memes,
sometimes the memes are not capturing what has happened. The memes are a dog whistle, calling for some violence, which then happens.
And what they're doing is they're seeding the market for an appetite for the violence they create. It ensures that the act of violence will be codified by the people who are making its cartoonish image and celebrate it.
People can feel like they belong to something going on.
100%, and they can even feel they caused it.
I'm part of this. This gives purpose in my life. Well, it gives meaning and purpose because I'm part of this global thing, this call to violence. I did my part in it, and we are all together. We are sort of the believers and all that.
And it's not different in some ways from the process of an individual. Like when you have psychopathy, usually psychopathy begins with violent ruminations. Right, so the violent ruminations in these brains that no one can control are essentially, they're ruminating over the acts and ruminating over the acts. And the ideation is what spurs the violence.
Right.
Now, there are three ways in which this happens, and we're going to describe all three ways. And I think this is really a science, what we're trying to arrive at through these data vignettes is a science of Hinduphobia. We need to understand.
So give us the three in abstract, and then we'll have separate episodes for each.
Well, there are three mechanisms that I think the science describes, and you can imagine what they would be. How do you go from the ideation to the violence? Well, there's poorly organized populist violence that occurs spontaneously through the ideation at opportune moments. These are mobs and riots.
So Leicester in England is an example, and we will feature that in a separate episode, all the details of it. So
Absolutely.
that's one kind of mechanism.
Right. The second kind, and it just follows through a progression, is slightly better organized. You have actors, you have networks of actors who are dedicated, usually in a more singular ideology, that are attempting to promote and organize violent acts through agitation online. And sometimes those behaviors can intersect with like things like state actors who can always come into these episodes to inflame tensions. So you have vectors of organization that are more directed. Where those directed vectors of organization take shape, you have opportunities for state actors to become involved.
So this Afia Siddiqui, would it fit that?
No, it wouldn't.
What would fit that? Khalistani?
I would say that the episode that we unveiled in Khalistan is a very good description of this.
The whole Khalistani movement, which is not a state actor though.
Well, it's not, but we found evidence of a robust network of self-identified Pakistani accounts that were supporting very specific Pakistani politicians that had very specific ideologies. And the idea that you have Khalistanis who are in Pakistan arguing for this is a little bit beyond the pale, I think.
Right. So that's the second one. We will do an episode on that. We will do an episode on his work, uncovering what's behind the Khalistani stuff in Canada, Britain, USA, Australia, etc. And his analysis of where these bots are and who supports whom and all of that. We will have a separate episode of that.
And then the third component to this is really the lone wolf. And that's always harder to see, but obviously the lone wolf is inspired by ideation, and there's relationships between what the lone wolf will do, and sometimes there's direct involvement from intelligence agencies there as well. But I think that, when you look at the online ideation, these are the ways it tends to manifest itself in the real world, often in tandem with the support from state actors. Either as populist violence, which can be agitated by state actors too, and riots, organized networks, which is a more condensed and directed form of violence, and finally, singular lone wolf behavior, which can be game-changing and very powerful, and only requires one dedicated actor to commit the act.
So Afia would fit that, Afia Siddiqui?
Yeah. Now that isn't a case of Hinduphobia, because this obviously pertains to a jihadi violence against Jews.
So that's a fascinating story of a Muslim from Pakistan, very brilliant person, highly educated with an advanced degree, medical science and all that.
I think she went to MIT.
And went to MIT. Yeah. And we'll have a separate episode on that because it deserves attention. How she became a jihadi, got arrested somewhere in Afghanistan or somewhere like that, and is in jail somewhere.
Yeah, see, but that's the problem. She should have gone to Princeton.
She went to Princeton?
No, she should have gone to Princeton.
She should have gone to Princeton. Okay, that's a good thing. We'll tell the Princeton people that you ought to take care. So then she's in jail for like 86 years or something.
Yes, that's right.
Big sentence. And then there's this movement to try and free her. And this movement turns violent, and they start attacking Jewish synagogues and various places.
That's right.
So this is going to be the third episode following this. So we have 3 episodes: the Leicester in the UK, which was a Hindu-Muslim mob, and how it was instilled and inspired and propagated by activities on the social media. And then the second one will be the whole Khalistan movement. We'll deconstruct the Khalistan movement like you've never seen it before. So please go to these sequels that we're going to have. And the third one will be the lady from the very Islamic, what do they call her? The medical, she's a highly trained medical doctor.
She was.
Jihadist, who is for 86 years prison sentence in the United States, and attempts to free her by attacking synagogues and other things. These are 3 episodes that are coming up, and then we'll talk about the future of this kind of analysis, why this is important, what it can do for society, in a pluralistic sense, any country, any religion, any people who are for peace and harmony, what this kind of analysis should do. And most of all, it's the Googles of the world who ought to take this seriously.
That's 100%.
And they should understand how they're being misused.
And the Twitters of the world.
Yeah.
So I think that's exactly right. And I think, Rajiv, to your point, that it goes without saying, we should probably say it, but it goes without saying that the mechanisms that we're describing here generalize to how vulnerable communities will face these problems across the world from different threats. Right? Any kind of hatred will fit the pattern that we're describing here. And I think that law enforcement officials and intelligence analysts and the academy Like we are really behind in trying to understand in a data-driven fashion how these threats combine and how they create a set of a predictive framework for being able to better protect vulnerable communities from the threats that are emerging from the social cyber domain.
And with that, I'll close this. And thank you very much. And within a few days after this, there'll be a sequel. Each episode will be interspersed with a few days gap to give you time to digest all this, because this is heavy stuff. It's very important stuff for anyone who is a peace-loving person. The way to peace is not to deny problems, but to face them and head on. And this, Joel is a partner in this kind of investigation that I'm very proud to have met. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rajiv.
We'll be back.